Discipline is one of the most misunderstood words in modern life. We treat it as though it were a personality trait, something certain people are born with and others simply lack. When it fails us, we blame ourselves for not being disciplined enough, rather than questioning whether we are practicing the right things in the right way. And so we keep failing in the same predictable places, convinced that willpower is the variable, when in fact it is method. The Stoics understood this more precisely than anyone. For them, Stoic discipline was not a disposition you either had or didn't. It was a set of practices, specific, repeatable, and designed to be performed whether or not you felt like it. The feeling was irrelevant. The practice was everything. What separated Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca from their contemporaries was not natural virtue. It was the daily, unglamorous execution of habits that the vast majority of people found uncomfortable and therefore avoided. These 5 practices are what Stoic discipline actually looked like from the inside. Not the philosophy on the page, the philosophy in the body, the schedule, the daily routine. Welcome to Logostoic. In today's video, we're going to examine 5 timeless Stoic discipline practices that the Stoics actually used, not as concepts to be admired, but as tools to be applied starting today. If this kind of thinking sharpens how you live, consider subscribing to Logostoic and turning on notifications. Now let's begin. Practice 1. Premeditatio Malorum. Inoculate the mind before the day begins. Most people begin their day with a vague hope that things will go smoothly. The Stoics began theirs with the deliberate imagination of everything that could go wrong. They called this Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils, and it was not pessimism. It was precision. Marcus Aurelius opened his meditations with exactly this practice. Before a single meeting, before a single decision, he reminded himself, "Today I shall meet ingratitude, insolence, treachery, envy, and unsociability." He was not preparing for despair. He was preparing for reality. A mind that has already encountered a difficulty in imagination is not ambushed by it in experience. It meets it with steadiness rather than shock. The deeper function of Premeditatio Malorum is this. It closes the gap between expectation and reality before the day opens it. Most emotional suffering is not caused by what happens. It is caused by the distance between what we expected and what arrived. The Stoic practice of premeditation collapses that distance deliberately, in advance, so the actual event, whatever it is, lands on a prepared mind. Practical application. Spend 2 minutes each morning asking, what obstacles am I likely to face today, and how do I intend to meet them? Not as catastrophizing, as inoculation. The mind that has rehearsed the blow absorbs it without breaking. Practice 2. The view from above. Shrink the drama, keep the perspective. When Marcus Aurelius felt the weight of whatever crisis was pressing on him, a betrayal, a military setback, a political maneuver, he practiced what scholars have called the view from above. He would deliberately shift his perspective upward and outward, imagining the scene from a great distance. His own life as a small point on the map of history, the present conflict as a brief disturbance in the span of centuries. He wrote, "Look at the courses of the stars as if you were running alongside them, and think constantly on the changes of the elements into each other." This was not escapism. It was calibration. The practice forces a confrontation with how small most of what we call problems actually are, not to dismiss them, but to engage with them at their actual scale rather than the inflated scale anxiety assigns them. Stoic discipline includes the discipline of perspective. The person who can zoom out, who can hold their current difficulty inside the frame of the whole of their life, or of history, or of the natural world, has access to a quality of equanimity that no amount of effort at the ground level can manufacture. Practical application. When something feels overwhelming, pause for 30 seconds. Ask, will this matter in 10 years? In 100? Not to dismiss it, to see it accurately. Then respond from that perspective, not from the panic of proximity. Practice 3. Voluntary discomfort. Choose hardship before it chooses you. Seneca practiced something his contemporaries considered eccentric and his modern readers find clarifying. He voluntarily ate the food of the poor, slept on a hard surface, and wore rough clothing for several days each month, despite having access to every comfort the Roman world could offer. He was not performing austerity. He was conducting an experiment. The question he was testing was simple. If the worst happened and I lost all of this, would I still be intact? He wrote to Lucilius about this practice directly. Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress. Ask yourself, is this the condition that I feared? The answer he found was always no. The feared thing, once voluntarily inhabited, lost its power to intimidate. Voluntary discomfort is Stoic discipline applied not to a task, but to the imagination of catastrophe. What makes this practice different from ordinary hardship is the choice. The person who endures cold because they have no heating learns something about survival. The person who chooses cold when the heating is available learns something about themselves, specifically that the comfort they thought they needed was not, in fact, necessary. Practical application. Once a week, choose one discomfort you normally avoid: a cold shower, a skipped meal, a difficult conversation you have been postponing. Not for the hardship itself, but for the evidence it provides that you remain capable of choosing. Practice 4. The evening examination. Try yourself before the day closes. Seneca described his nightly practice in one of his letters to Lucilius with a precision that makes it unmistakable. When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, aware of the habit that's now mine, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. This was not journaling in the modern sense, a space for feelings and reflections. It was a self-conducted trial. The Stoic evening examination has 3 movements. First, what did I do wrong today? Not to produce guilt, but to produce information. Second, where did I fall short of the standard I set for myself? Third, what will I do differently tomorrow? The sequence matters. Guilt without correction is self-indulgence. Examination without judgment is sentiment. What the Stoics practiced was neither. It was the rigorous, honest accounting of a person who holds themselves to a standard and checks, every evening, whether they kept it. What makes this Stoic discipline rather than self-criticism is the absence of shame. The examination is conducted the way a craftsman examines their work, looking for flaws not to condemn the work, but to improve it. Practical application. Before sleeping, write 3 sentences. 1 thing I handled well. 1 thing I handled poorly, and 1 specific change I will make tomorrow. Keep it brief. The honesty matters more than the length. Practice 5. Cato's walk. Train yourself to need no audience. Cato the Elder had a habit that made him an object of mockery among certain Romans and an object of admiration among others. He regularly walked through the most crowded public spaces in Rome dressed in clothing that was deliberately plain, even rough, the kind of garment that would have embarrassed most men of his status. He did this not because he lacked better clothing, but because he was training something specific: the capacity to be indifferent to how he appeared to others. The Stoics understood that the need for external approval is one of the most consistent sources of internal instability. A person whose sense of self depends on how they are perceived will always be subject to the perceptions of whoever happens to be watching. Cato's walk was a deliberate practice of loosening that dependency, of proving to himself, through repeated action in public, that his worth was not contingent on anyone else's assessment of it. This is Stoic discipline in a form that modern life rarely discusses. The discipline not of effort, but of indifference. Not the indifference of apathy, but the indifference of a person who has located their standard somewhere that cannot be reached by other people's opinions. Practical application. Once a week, do something in public that you would normally avoid because of how it might appear. Eat alone at a restaurant. Sit in silence in a social setting, where what is practical rather than what impresses. Each time, notice how the sky does not fall. What these 5 practices share is not difficulty for its own sake. They are precise instruments for building the same thing from different angles, a self that is not at the mercy of its circumstances. Premeditatio Malorum prepares the mind for what is coming. The view from above restores perspective when it is lost. Voluntary discomfort proves that comfort was never the requirement. The evening examination closes the gap between who you were and who you intended to be. And Cato's walk removes the one approval that is most insidiously sought, that of the crowd. Stoic discipline, practiced this way, is not self-punishment. It is self-construction. Each of these practices builds, day by day, the architecture of a person who can be relied upon, by others and by themselves. Stoic discipline, practiced this way, is not self-punishment. It is self-construction. And each of these 5 practices is a tool for that construction, not a demand, but an invitation. The question is not whether they work. The question is whether you are willing to try. If this video gave you something worth keeping, consider liking it, not as a gesture, but because Stoic discipline, like most things worth having, spreads best when people who have found it help others find it too. Every like carries this further than this conversation. And leave a comment. Write down which of these 5 practices you are committing to beginning this week. Not all 5, 1. Name it specifically. Because Stoic discipline doesn't begin with a system. It begins with a single decision, made today, honored tomorrow. The person you want to become is built from exactly those moments. Subscribe to Logostoic and turn on notifications, because these practices are not completed in a single viewing. They deepen with repetition, and so do these conversations. Well, keep going if you will. May you practice with honesty, fail with grace, and return, always, to the work.